Hello everybody, my name's Michael Clark. I'm a livestock procurement officer for Dumbia Highland Meats. I cover across both species, sourcing sheep and cattle off farm, ready for slaughter. And we're here today at the farm just looking at what we're looking at when we're drawing prime cattle ready for slaughter. We're going to talk about the handling points of the animal, the way the animal's put down fat, what we look for, and then a few of our common queries that we see in the industry at the minute. So when we look to draw the fat cattle for slaughter, there's two key parts that make up the classification of the animal there. They have the conformation of the animal, which is where we look at how well the animal is muscled, how much flesh is in the carcass, and then there's the fat cover as well, which is obviously the covering and the animal laying down fat across that carcass as well. We'll have a quick handle of the crush in a moment, but the way that we look at the conformation of the animal, we look at, and the grader as well, in the abattoir from the MLC, he'll look to grade the animals on this point, and that's really a key to how we're going to talk about maximising carcass value here. The grader will look at and feel across the rib of the animal, across the loin there, and then look at the round, the hind quarter of the animal as well. And the reason he does that is because that's where we see traditionally the high value of cuts coming from. So in the ribs there, that's where we've got obviously our ribeye steaks, moving down the sirloin, with more kilos of flesh, more sirloin, more value in the carcass there, and then again into the hind quarter where we've got the rump, we've had the top side, the silver sides. A lot of the roasting cuts come from that part of the animal, a lot of the sliced meats as well. So again, going back into that higher value part of the carcass there as well. As we move into sort of the Europe grid, and the animal is graded accordingly on those 3 points of the animal. If there are 2 points of the animal that are a U, for example, and 1 point at an R, the animal will be graded overall as a U. And likewise, if there's 2 points there, the rib and the loin are an R grade, who's got a U back end, it'll be graded as an R. The better conformation cattle, the more flesh we see in those areas, the higher the value will be back to the farmer as well. So it's an adding value to the whole process through there. Then we look at covering across the fat class of the animal, and when an animal reaches its sort of genetic potential and starts to lay down what we call finish, it will put down more and more fat in certain areas. So as an animal puts down, it'll lay down more fat here in its brisket, it'll put more across its ribs there, and then it'll have like 2 nice little pockets of fat either side of its tail head, which we'll be able to see more detail in the crush there. But this is a good indication of the animal has reached its full growth and its genetic potential, and now the feed that we're putting into it is getting converted and stored as fat. So when we look for selecting an animal for slaughter, as I say, we're looking at the 2 things. We're looking at the conformation of the animal and then the fat cover of the animal as well. So the 3 main points that we look at when we look at the conformation of the animal, sort of looking here in its shoulder and its rib there, it wants to be sort of full in its top line, a real good width of flesh and muscle in its back there. So we look at the conformation there in the shoulder, the same again in the loin here. We're again looking for that width, that real depth of muscle and flesh here. Very full animal we have in front of us here. And then the round as well, and that'll help us give the grading and the conformation of the animal. So when the animal arrives and is presented to the grader, hung up as a side of beef, as a carcass there, he'll look at those 3 points in order to determine the classification of the animal. So currently here in the UK and the rest of Europe, we grade off the Europe grid, which is E, U, R, O and P, grading from an excellent conformation down to a poor conformation. So the grader will look at those 3 points and determine one of those letters to represent the carcass's conformation. From that, they would also assess the fat cover and the fat category from as well. And similar to the 3 points on the carcass there, we're just looking at slightly different points. So we're looking down here at the brisket of the animal and see there's a build-up of fat there. So once an animal's reached its potential, it's filled its genetic growth of the muscle there, it'll start to store that energy and lay down that feed as fat. And the areas that we see there, we'll see it in the brisket, we'll see it across the ribs here, we can a nice movement of there. Not excessive, not real thick, I can only pinch there slightly. And then here as well on the tail head. So similar there, there's a pocket either side of the tail head there. And if you can really, there's not a great covering of fat on this animal, it's not 100% finished just yet. I can only pinch very slightly there. This wants to be almost near a handful or a little bit more. So good animal, a good conformation. 2 of the 3 fat points there are starting to lay down. I would grade that animal there as an R3 if we killed it today. So the ideal spec we are looking for is that R3, R4L. So the farmer could keep this animal a little bit longer, add more weight, and he'd get to his full genetic potential. He would reach an R4L. So we have here some cattle that are a little bit off finishing. They'll have come off their grazing season in the summer, come inside into the winter housing and just really ready to start that intensive finishing process there. So as we look at the points as we did on the other fat cattle, we can see here, looking at the shoulder here, it's not as big, it's not as wide, it's sloping away from here, really not just sort of full of meat. Likewise in the loin, just lacking a little bit of finish there. This has some good width to it. Again, not quite as superior as some of the other cattle there. And as I say, there's potential here. There's real potential that this animal will respond well to an intensive high energy diet. And then again, as we see here, the animals, either side of the spine, it's sloping away where we would expect an animal once it's finished to really have sort of good flesh, well muscled animal sort of bulging out either side there. So the animal's looking well, there's good potential in it. As I say, it's just sloping a little bit on the shoulder, it's sloping on the loin there. And again, it's not very full in its hind quarter here. So in the traditional fat cattle, we're looking for really sort of the muscle to bulge out, and that is certainly down to part of the conformation and the breeding of the animal, but this will alter as well with good feeding. So as we look at the fat classes and the fat points of the animal as well, we can see here the animal does have some brisket. It is a common area where an animal will lay down fat as it starts to feed. Into the ribs as well, we do have some slight movement. Again, similar to the other cattle there, not excessive, not a problem. As we say, once the animal fills out its muscle conformation and reaches its genetic potential, these will be the areas that will then convert the feed into fat and store in the animal. And then again, on the top of the tailhead, either end of the tailhead where we'd usually see a pocket of fat, there's nothing. I can barely even sort of pinch anything there at all. So again, it's just a good example of how these compare to the animals that are a month away from going. This will be more towards that 4 to 6 month period, depending how well it responds to feed. Good potential, it's had time to go out and graze and grow that big frame, and now the intensive finishing period is about filling that frame out and making the animal into a better conformation. So this is an animal that we've seen is typical. It's just coming off the grass in the summer and it's ready to go into its winter housing to start its finishing process there. So if we were to look at the conformation points of the animal here compared to the last few that we've just looked at, we see here in the shoulder, it's starting to build flesh where the animal should do here as it enters an intensive period of feeding. But just at the moment, it's not very big. And look at my hand there, there's a big gap. It slopes away the animal. Again, as we look towards the back, further down its loin, again, it's starting to build flesh there, but just not as full. Like my hand should be sort of full there. There should be a full muscle sort of curving out in a convex motion there. And again, from its pins, the whole animal moving slightly narrower into there. So once the animal gets onto hard solid feed, a good energy source, it'll start to bring those animals out and it'll really sort of fill in its conformation and its potential there. Same again with the round, there's a potential there. The animal's had a good time out at grass, it's had time to mature and develop and grow that frame, and now we can look to intensively feed it and add the value to the carcass and the flesh there. Similarly shown, if we look at the fat points of the animal, we look across the ribs there, there's a slight bit of fat there, as there always be with these type of animals. And then across the top of the tailhead, there's nothing yet. The animal's still a lean animal. Like if we were to process the animal today, it'd probably be a fat class 1 or 2 rather than our optimum 3 or 4L. So that's shown here. And then again down here in the brisket as well, there's barely any fat laid down on that. So this animal here, just come in, really ready to enter that finishing period there where it will respond well, and we'll see these areas really develop and flesh out there to help get those conformations. Because of the land types that we have in the UK, we are seeing a variety of breeds now, and it's important to take note of the strengths of these breeds, as some of them we can feed slightly differently to try and get the most potential out and return the maximum value for the farmer. Here we've obviously some continental bred or cross cattle. Some of these obviously have quite a big frame, a big bone structure. These will be sort of early maturing, and the more feed that we feed these early on, the more growth we're going to get. And then once they reach their genetic potential there, they'll start to lay down fat there. Other breeds we have in the UK, some of the more native types, will not necessarily respond well to sort of high protein, high energy diet straight away. Some of them require a more forage type diet to grow the frame before they can lay down that conformation and that fat cover as well. The way that we're seeing it generally more in the UK is we are seeing, very sadly, sort of the suckler cow numbers declining at the moment, and as a result we're seeing more of our beef coming from dairy type animals or crossbred animals. This isn't necessarily a problem. A lot of them still fit the retail spec that we have here in the UK, and they are good prime quality beef. As I say, it's just very much about the resources you have on farm, about maximising the value of those. As they say, they do respond better to different types of feeding compared to pure continentals or pure dairy types. But again, it's just important that we know what to look for and how to maximise those animals' potential. If we're talking about our perfect animal, if you will, we're very fortunate in the UK that we have a lot of UK retail customers. We do support British beef very well. We can handle animals all the way through. We're talking from 270 kilos of a carcass weight to 400. That band is narrowing slightly. We are looking for more of like our ideal dart down the middle is like an R4L at 330 kilos at the moment. Some of these guys won't be able to lay down fat and reach that potential until they're maybe slightly heavier. Some of the natures might be slightly smaller, but it's about trying to adapt and use the resources we have on farm to get the value out of those carcasses. When we talk about the ideal carcass weight, we're looking for more for that 330, 340 of a carcass weight. Like what we see that on live weight, like if we typically for a sort of a continental or a well-fed native breed that's a prime animal under 30 months old, we're looking, depending on certain factors, around about that 55% kill out range. So to achieve that, we're looking the top side of that 600, 620, 640 range to select them on farm. As I say, that's one of the parameters we'd look at when we look to select animals for slaughter. It's really important that we focus on the carcass, the fat cover and the conformation of them. As we say, it's a big live animal. They do eat a lot of feed on farm, and obviously the feed is a very volatile market. It depends on a lot of factors, so it really pays to actually sort of drill down on your own farm costing, and is it better to feed an animal to be a heavier carcass, or is it better to hit that smaller carcass, look at the costs on farm, and then put more beast through the system that you have. So what I would recommend to farmers is that to handle your cattle, to weigh them regularly, to look over them. Like it's about maximising returns on farm and selecting cattle that are in that ideal spec. As obviously like either end of that, if they're overweight or over fat or underweight or don't have the quite finish on them, then we're not going to be able to maximise our values from that carcass. So handling them regularly, weighing them regularly does pay dividends on farm, and keeping in touch with that. So some of the common things that we see on farm, or we're really looking to drill down on and just help streamline the process, is when we see animals arriving at the abattoir that are dirty. When we talk about a dirty animal, like this is certainly far from one, but we talk about the area that is under the belly, under the brisket, sometimes down the hind legs, those key places where we first look in the abattoir to open the hide, because under that hide we have a sterile with a clean carcass and environment there. And one key parameter of our business is that we're not just a factory, we're a food factory. We're about producing clean, safe food. And obviously if we're coming in with a carcass that is dirty, it is wet underneath there, that increases the amount of bacteria in that slaughter environment that can be potentially passed to the carcass. Now, there are certain precautions that we will take and we have to take. It's under the guidance of all our vets at the abattoir. It might be a case of, if there's some cattle arrived that are wet, we might leave them to the end of the day to process. It might be a case of we even have to leave them overnight. Some of the cattle we would recommend to be clipped on the brisket, up the inside of the belly there. It's just those first points of incision where we look to open the hide there. Our ideal animal, as it arrives at the abattoir, it's all done in a very calm procedure. The unloading is as quiet and as calm as possible. A lot of the facilities that handle this and do this have put a lot of time and effort and work into the animal welfare, because that does have an impact on the meat quality as well. When we unload the animal will travel with obviously their passports. They also have like a food chain information document, or an FCI. Please ensure this is filled out correctly before they arrive on site, as it contains a lot of the key information that we require when we go to process that animal. Part of that, the first step in that is sort of ear tags. We want to check them all before they leave farm, ensure that they're both clean, they're both matching, and that the information on the passport is correct as well. Because as they arrive to be processed or presented for slaughter, we're making a claim about this animal, and if any of those points of identification don't align, then it's potential that we might have to isolate the animal, we might have to hold the carcass overnight or for longer until we can prove the origins of this animal. And in severe instances, it might cause the animal to be wasted or discrepancy or disposed of if we can't prove its origin. So as I say, 2 matching ear tags, both clean, matching all the paperwork and the passports on there. Check those the night before arrival, because once the animals arrive at the site, because of the legislation that we have in the UK, an animal's not allowed to be returned on farm. So the animal will have to be processed. Similar to the farm assurance, go on Spec Checker, go on the QMS website and just ensure that the animals, if you've bought them in, if you've bred them home, are covered and valid in the farm assurance. Because as well, if they're not, and we find that at the abattoir, it limits our options and our markets for those animals as well. So just a 10-minute check the night before can really save a lot of headaches and a lot of ear scratches. We've talked a little bit about welfare. One of the things that we do see slightly in the abattoir still is bruising, both from loading, from handling systems, and when we see bruising across those parts of the animal, we have to trim and remove that from the animal in order for it to be deemed safe to enter the food chain. The bruising will cause obviously a reddish pigment in the meat. It reduces the shelf life on, and a lot of our retail customers will reject that on site if they see it as well. So again, it devalues the carcass. We have to trim it out, and that'll all get cut off the carcass before the animal is weighed, so it is a cost to the farmer. The farmer hasn't been paid for that bruised meat that we've had to cut off the carcass in order to process it. Within that as well, one of our last points that I'll talk about is if we talk about selecting cattle in spec and for slaughter, anything that falls beyond that either is a heavier carcass or a thicker fatted carcass. A lot of our customers, our retail customers, will require a certain spec of what they require from us, and if that animal falls outside of that, it's up to us to put in additional work, labour. We'll have to trim the carcass. Any cuts that are too big, we'll have to trim to fit, and the offcuts will be devalued into mince. And likewise, it's a cost on farm. The farmer has paid to grow these cattle, to lay down the fat on the carcass, and then we're cutting it off and devaluing it. So it's really important that we can just get them in, weigh them regularly, handle them regularly, speak to your local fieldsman, your local auctioneer, and just really try and all talk together to maximise the value on farm. Throughout the slaughter process, the FSS, the Food Standards Scotland, will have various staff members throughout the abattoir checking certain parts of the carcass. They will check through all the offal of the animal, check that indeed that is fit for consumption, fit for any outlying diseases or conditions they may find that could affect that carcass. Most abattoirs will have that information available to feed back to the farmer, so it will include things like, is there any lesions on the lungs, is there any pneumonic problems, is there any liver fluke present or previously been active there. And again, these are all things that should be available for farmers from your abattoir or processor, and then that's something that you can work with your farm vet or your consultant to implement on farm, and again to try and improve the overall performance of the cattle.